it occurred to me after I finished off that last video that I should tell you about that job in Santa Maria and how I got it. Now, Lyle in Santa Barbara told me that the job I wanted was in Santa Maria. And so I put in the requisition in Santa Maria. Now, up in Santa Maria, Wally, who was the boss up there at the time, had a four-man shop. That's what they had in Santa Barbara, also four men and the boss. And then Wally had four men working at his place. Now, out of those four, one of them was a temporary. I don't know if temporary is provisional. Provisional would be a better word. But he wasn't full-time GTE. Now, this guy was sharp. Retired from the Air Force, electronics, worked on the airplanes. After he fixed the airplane, he had to go up in the airplane with the pilots because you fixed it, baby. It better be right. So, pretty sharp guy named Mike Espinoza. Good guy. Good guy. Anyway, so he had this Mike as a provisional, and in his four-man shop. So he wanted to get Mike on full time, but there was a problem. There's this operator down there in Santa Maria that's got his requisition, or rather his job bid, in for this job. And so he couldn't take Mike on because there was already a full-time GTE employee who put his bid in for this job, me. So he couldn't get Mike on full-time. So he put in the requisition with the HR department, and the HR department said, well, you can't have Mike because there's this guy, this operator. So he says, well, then pull the requisition. So I'm sitting down there in Goleta at the time, waiting for this job to get pulled, and talking to Lyle every time I saw him come through the office. What's going on? What's going on? And he assured me that the job was in Santa Maria. I couldn't understand why I hadn't been pulled yet if the job actually existed. What's up with that? Wally told me a whole bunch of this story later on, years later. But he pulled the requisition when he found out he couldn't have Mike because this operator had his bid in for this job and he wanted Mike. So he pulled the requisition and then waited some months more, while I'm sitting down there sweating out my job in Santa Barbara as an operator. And so he finally got tired of waiting. Every time he'd call the HR department, HR, and I forget what his name was, but he would tell Wally that you can't have him because this operator still got his bid in. Well, I was getting assurances from Lyle that the job existed, so I wasn't going to pull that bid because I knew the job was up there. Wally didn't know that I was talking to Lyle. So anyway, he didn't know. So he finally called his boss. Wally called his boss and Lyle's boss and said, listen, I need to get Mike on. Mike is an expert at all this stuff. He really knows his stuff. I need this kind of a guy here, And he got permission from his boss to increase the size of his shop to 5 guys. So he'd be able to pull me in and pull Mike almost at the same time. So he'd get Mike on permanent, and he'd have to suffer through this operator in his shop. And so he pulled my rec. Now I have to go down for testing. Okay. Now, I hadn't done a whole lot of studying about what air conditioning was, how it worked, or anything like that. Okay. I'd done a lot of relying on the man upstairs to help me get this job because I knew it was in his will that I get a job that I could get the wife and support the family with. So I was convinced I was going to get this job. I didn't know how. So I went in for testing, Now understand, they wanted Mike. You know, they wanted Mike and they wanted him now. So they pulled me in for testing. And I go in there and I take the test. And I'm supposed to identify these various parts in the system of an air conditioning system, what is this and what is that. I didn't know an air dryer from a condenser from an evaporator. I didn't know any of it. Okay, it was a bad surprise to find out how much I didn't know when I was taking this test to get this new position. Now, I had to pass the test to get the new position. So I took this test and I know I blew it. I know I failed that test. Well, I'm sitting out there and the head of HR at the time, and I don't remember the man's name. He was a nice guy, though. And he said, well, how's it feel? You're going to get out of operator services. I said, well, I don't know. That test really bothered me. I didn't know as much as I thought I knew. And he interrupts me and says, don't worry, you passed the test. Well, I didn't click on that. I'm too nervous. And I said, no, for real. I wish I could remember his name because I called him by name. I said, no, for real, it's so and so. I didn't. That test was a lie. Don't worry, you passed the test. And still didn't get the hint. And gosh, I'm sweating it out. She says, don't worry, you passed the test. And so I hear the lady in the other room. She's grading my tests, and she calls out to the guy to come in there. And I hear them whispering under their breath in the other room about all this stuff. And he comes out in a minute. And congratulations, you passed the test. My God. So Wally had to pick up Michael and me at the same time. And that's the story of how I got into the buildings department. All true. All true. Now, the story. I don't know if I told the story. I'm going to go over it again real quick of how I even got on with GTE, General Telephone, at the time. Because I had 10 years after having dropped out of high school. I had 10 years of floating around from job to job, trying to find a job where I could make lots of money because I had plans for my life. I needed money. Didn't need to be rich, but I needed money. Matter of fact, in my prayers, being rich is the one thing I didn't ask for. I wanted a wife, kids, a house, and enough money to maintain it all. That was my prayer. So I wasn't interested in getting rich, but I had to get on with GTE. So I knew that operator was the only way to get in the place because you had to start somewhere, and they're just not going to put you in some high-paying job unless you already have experience somewhere else. So I had applied, and then I would call once a week. Joy was her name. I'd call Joy once a week. She's working the HR phone, and it got to the point where she knew who it was, and she'd answer the phone, and I'd say, "You got a job for me yet?" She knew who I was. Jay, nothing's happened yet because blah, blah, blah. And then once in a while she'd say, or actually once, she said, well, they are pulling requisitions now for operators. So if you're going to get pulled, you're in there. Well, they didn't pull me. And I kept calling them once a week. And when she told me that they were pulling people, I called her 3 times a week. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning. First thing, she'd recognize my voice. We were on friendly terms, and she'd give me the yes or no whether or not anything was going on. And then one time, after I didn't get pulled, she told me, Jay, I went to update your file. Now understand this: they have a file folder, a big drawer of folders, okay, and you're in there. And every time you call, they have to go back and find your file, pull it, and then note that you called that day when you called. And then that file goes in the front of the freaking drawer. Okay? I learned that. So I call every time it gets pulled, no matter who else called before, I'm going to get pulled that morning, noted that I called, and my file goes to the front of the drawer. So Joy says, I went to note your file last time you called and it wasn't there. She said they got pulled every 6 months, all the recs that don't get jobs. So they pulled them and they sent them down to Inglewood for storage. So I had to come in and reapply. I said, okay, no problem. Went down there, excuse me, reapplied for the job. And it just so happened that the manager of the HR was there at that time. And this is a different manager than got me on with the buildings department later on. They move around. So I gave him the application. And of course, I'm explaining this 10 years of going from job to job to job because I would not be satisfied. I got fired a couple of times, but the rest of the times I left because the upward mobility wasn't happening. The money wasn't going to be coming because the upward mobility was stagnant or what have you. And so I had a really bad record of, an arm's length worth of different jobs in that 10-year period. So I had to convince these people that once I got on with GTE or General Telephone, it wasn't going to happen like that anymore, So I wrote all this down inside the application, and I took it up to the guy, the HR manager, and I handed it to him, and I said, "Well, I need to talk to somebody because if you just read this application the way I wrote it, you're never going to hire me." So, and he, in all seriousness, looked up and said, because he's sitting and I'm standing, and he says, "Do you want to be interviewed?" And I said, "Yes, please interview me." So I got my interview, and I explained what I'd done, why I'd done what I'd done, and that what they were looking at on the application was the old Jay, and here I stand, the new Jay. This is not what's there. So when I come to work here, I'm here for 20 or 30 years. So the guy, it's another guy at that time, because I got asked if I wanted to be interviewed by one manager, and then when I got interviewed, it was by another manager. All right, so I explained to the new manager what the deal was, and how I wasn't the person that was indicated on the application. I was a new guy now. And he started to give me the HR people are funny. He starts to brush me off. Yeah. He's heard this before. And I looked him straight in the face. I talked about being overconfident and cocky before. I looked him straight in the face and I said, "Listen, I don't mean to ruffle your feathers. I'm not trying to insult you or anything like that. But I said, you only have one choice here. And that's whether or not you're going to be the guy that hires me. Because if it's not you, it's going to be the guy that comes after you because I am coming to work here. Okay? This is where I'm coming to work. And it doesn't matter if it takes me another couple of years. I am coming to work here." That impressed him. The sincerity, because baby, it was sincere. It was sincere. I was wasted 10 years after high school, and baby, I was done wasting time. I had to get something done here. So, so that's how I got on there. And the deal with Wally told me all about it, that he found out that this guy operator, he had my file pulled and said, "Well, look at his absenteeism." And the HR guy said, "Well, Wally, you know what? For an operator, that's pretty damn good." Because when you're an operator, you're touching all the same equipment. You're going from place to place. And anybody that comes with a cold or the flu, before you know it, a half a dozen or a dozen people have got a cold or the flu, And besides that, I was riding a dirt bike. And I'd crash. And I didn't take much time off. I drugged my right leg to work. I lived a little over a mile from the office. And I drug my right leg to work like for 10 weeks. And outrageous pain because I didn't know that I could take, what was it, disability. Didn't know about disability. Hell, I didn't even know there was a pension at GTE. But anyway, that's the story of how I got on with the company and how I got on with buildings department. And that's enough because you already did a half hour of the other one if you stayed around that long. And this one, we're up to 15 minutes and 30 seconds. So we're going to say goodbye for now. And I'm going to get ready to go to bed. All right. See ya. Bye bye. And all that good. God bless you. How's that? Good night.